Hi, and thank you for tuning in to Noir Histoire. I'm Natasha, and in this episode, I'll be discussing Claudine. Claudine is a 1974 film starring Diahann, Carroll, and James Earl Jones as Claudine and Rupert, aka Roop, two people living imperfect lives who meet and begin dating. Over the course of the film, we see the progress of their romantic relationship and the difficulties of trying to make things work. It's difficult enough for two people to begin and maintain a relationship, so it's only made more complex when children, welfare, and child support are added to the mix. The story revolves around Claudine, a Harlem woman in her 30s who's on welfare but has a job to help supplement her income. She makes a long commute by bus to the suburbs where she's a domestic worker for a white family. While at work one day, she meets Roop, a garbage man who asks her out on a date. Over the course of the film, we see the progress of their romantic relationship as well as the complexities of their lives, which involve children, welfare, and child support. Claudine has 6 kids and receives welfare, while James Earl Jones has 2 children and, in a sense, representing the male perspective, pays child support. Roop decides to start chatting up Claudine on this particular day, which leads to a bit of witty banter between the two of them. It turns out that Roop previously noticed Claudine and had been interested for a while and finally had the chance to speak to her on this day. From seeing her in their brief conversation, he's able to quickly and accurately surmise that she's on welfare but working this job off the books and not reporting the income to the welfare office. The reality is that she has an ice hockey lineup of kids, and the money she receives from welfare is just not enough to support them. Likely, the money she makes from her job on the side wouldn't be enough on its own either, but the combination of the two provides a little bit more breathing room. Before the scene, we get a glimpse into Claudine's life as the film opens with her and the kids running down the street in Harlem as they start their day. She's running to catch the bus to get to work in the suburbs while signing papers for the kids and checking over their stuff as they're headed off to school. Claudine's kids range from high school to preschool age and are evenly split by gender. Once on the bus, Claudine settles in with a group of other women who are also headed out to the suburbs for work. The women are quite comfortable with each other and have likely become friends after seeing each other every morning during their commute. They crack jokes and banter about their lives, dating, intimate relations, etc. The family that Claudine works for, they seem nice enough, but they're her employer, so the interaction is different. When she begins chatting with Roop, she seems a bit reserved at first, but warms up to his banter and becomes a bit more relaxed. I like banter and dialogue that flows, so the various fast-paced back-and-forth conversations throughout the film were amusing to me. Initially, Claudine declines Roop's invitation to go out on a date. During the conversation with her bus friends, Claudine states that she hasn't been dating or even thinking about men because her life is so hectic given her responsibilities and past relationships haven't ended well. Roop questions her reason for turning him down, not in an aggressive or demanding manner, but rather just trying to gain some understanding. When she expresses her concerns, Roop explains that her having children or whatever other complexities in her life are not a problem for him. With that reassurance, Claudine decides to take a chance and takes Roop up on his offer. She gives him her address and they make plans for him to pick her up and go out on a date. Roop arrives at Claudine's apartment as planned, but she's running a bit late and the kids aren't expecting him. So Claudine's daughter rightfully leaves him outside to wait. For a first date with someone, whether man or woman, on whom you haven't done the Carfax, meaning nobody that you know knows them and can give you the rundown, you should pick a public place to meet. What if they're crazy? My personal phone number and email are unlisted at work, and I see those people pretty much every day. Much less giving my address to someone that I don't even know or I've just met. To say that Claudine's household is busy is an understatement. The kids are a ragtag bunch of a variety of ages, and given the amount, they're just all over the place. But I actually like the kids from the very beginning. They've all got their own personalities. The 2 youngest kids, Francis and Lurleen, are fairly quiet and very sweet. The 2 in the middle, Paul and Patrice, are a bit rough around the edges, but you can tell that they're quite smart. The 2 oldest kids, Charles and Charlene, are only teens but seemingly already a bit world-weary. From this very first interaction, you can tell that there's going to be some mess. When Roop first arrived and knocked on the door, Patrice was the one that answered and sent him on his way. Until Claudine arrived and invited him into the apartment, Patrice had been the first and only kid that Roop met. As the audience, we had somewhat of a glimpse into the household, but now with Roop in the apartment, you get to see him witnessing this for the first time. There are 7 people living in this relatively small apartment, so there's not a lot of personal space. Most of the kids have some kind of complaint or drama going on, and Claudine is in the thick of it the moment she walks in the door. Charles has taken over the bathroom for some quality alone time, which leads to one of the other kids air hustling and putting his business on blast. Charlene, the super pro black sister soldier daughter with an attitude and a new new boyfriend, turns off the TV, which the younger kids are watching because Tarzan, a white man, is beating up black people. The younger kids aren't really problematic. They're just being kids and have a bunch of energy. All in all, there's a bunch of noise, attitudes, snippy comments, whining, and other manners of activity. They're not bad kids, but there's a lot of young energy and not nearly enough space in the apartment. At first, none of the kids pay Roop any mind, and even Claudine seems to forget about him for a moment. So he's able to hang back for a few minutes and just observe the mayhem. Claudine has just endured a day at work and long bus ride home and now has to deal with a house full of fussing kids. She's eventually able to corral the kids and get them under relative control. Claudine tries to beg off from the date, but Roop instead offers her the option to shower and get dressed at his place, after which they can go out to dinner. We have to suspend reality here, as in real life, I would tell her not to go to this stranger's house, as she'd be risking being later found dead in some alley. But the kids finally taking notice of Roop are thinking along the same lines and begin asking questions. They launch an interrogation trying to figure out who this man is that's trying to take out their mother. Sassy, mannish, or otherwise rude behavior is not cute when exhibited by anyone, including kids. But I don't have a problem with kids asking questions or refusing to do something or otherwise blindly follow orders that make them uncomfortable. They're not perfect, but they have good common sense, and I like the honesty and openness of conversation between Claudine and the kids. All of the kids' earlier energy is now focused on asking Roop questions. They want to know who he is, how he knows their mother, where they're going, and what they're going to do. And instead of being put off by the kids' directness, Roop instead seems rather amused. Claudine is sweet and affectionate towards the kids, but she doesn't coddle or talk down to them. She's not encouraging them to become street kids, but she's also not raising them to be pushovers. Both Claudine and Roop speak to the kids as though they have some kind of sense, which is pretty cool. When Claudine arrives at Roop's apartment, there are clothes thrown all about, and he has a squatter/furry roommate. Claudine is supposed to be there to take a bath and get dressed, but as expected, he does try to make a sexual advance on Claudine, but she easily brushes him off. In a different movie, that could have gone a whole other direction. Instead of the nice dinner that Rupert told the kids he had planned for Claudine, they ended up having the fried chicken dinner that the kids assumed would take place. I guess it was fancy because there was a bottle of wine. Like I previously stated, this is someone that Claudine doesn't know very well, and going to his apartment to take a bath and get dressed of all things is certainly taking a risk that he might be a creep. While soaking in the tub, Claudine falls asleep, and to be fair, so does Roop. But he wakes up and goes into the bathroom, presumably to check on her. Rather than quickly waking her up and leaving, he hangs around and she's quite a bit caught off guard to awaken and find him staring and smiling at her. Roop and Claudine end up talking about the realities of their life versus the assumptions that people make. Claudine has 6 children and collects $30 from welfare for each child, for which she has to undergo questioning at the welfare office because of the belief that she's trying to get rich off the system. $180 in 1974 is about $1,020 in today's money. Not enough to make anyone rich, and not enough to comfortably support a family of 7. In today's money, that kind of income will put you in the range of poverty for a household of 1 person. And Claudine's household consists of 7 people. And as a woman with 6 children, but no husband, boyfriend, father in the picture, some might assume that was just, randomly having kids all over the place. But Claudine had actually been married twice, and some of the kids had been fathered by her husband, so the relationships just didn't work out. It's not explicitly stated, but I got the sense that the fathers weren't really in the picture. Meanwhile, Roop has 2 children, but they live in a different state, so he's unable to see them regularly. Further complicating matters, there seems to be some tension with his children's mother or mothers and child support. The two go back and forth talking about their kids and wonky situations. Given that they both have complicated situations, it might not be the best choice for the two of them to be together, but it kind of works because they get each other better than other individuals who might have less drama. Not passing judgment, but here it is that Claudine already has 6 kids, and the very first day she even speaks to Rufus, let alone goes on a date with him, mere hours later, they're laid up in his bed. I'm not saying you should have a fixed timetable for dating or being intimate, but rather that they both seem rather impulsive and things are moving quickly. On the one hand, people back then sure like to get married multiple times, and it's a movie, so, they can't drag the courtship out, I guess. The scene where she returns home after her night out, only to be interrogated by the kids, is one of my favorites. They ask her all kinds of questions about why she's coming in at that time in the morning, and the commentary among the kids about what happened on the date and her being their mom and too old to be intimate with someone was realistic, but also pure comedy. The kids were great in the scene as their timing was perfect. But there's an undercurrent with the older kids that they've seen this scene play out before, which makes them skeptical about Roop. Claudine meets some new man and things are great in the beginning, only for him to disappoint her by flaking out. The kids don't want to get their hopes up, so when Roop later comes over to properly meet them, they attempt to ignore him ringing the doorbell. This continues even after he enters the apartment, but he singles out each of the kids and tries to connect with them. Roop is quite comfortable with Claudine's situation and actually seems to know the basic rundown of her situation without having to be told, most likely as a result of having dated other women from the neighborhood. Instead of being put off by her kids, he recognizes the situation for what it is and doesn't pass judgment. It offers a peek into what the experience might have been like for some mothers on welfare, especially once Miss Cabot shows up. She's a caseworker from the welfare office who randomly stops by and just peeks and prods her way through the apartment. Her tendency to just pop up likely also played a role in the kids' refusal to let Roop in earlier in the film. When Miss Cabot arrives, they have a code for giving everyone in the house a heads up so they can ferret away the few electronics and household goods that might raise questions. These searches are incredibly invasive, as Cabot just shows up and searches around whenever she feels like it. Claudine is not getting a lot of money from the government and doesn't seem unwilling to work. Rather, it seems that her job will not pay her enough on its own to allow her to provide for her family. We know that she had 2 marriages that ended, but it's unclear if it was due to divorce or her ex's dying. And either way, she's likely not getting much, if any, child support from the fathers of her children. They're not living a lifestyle of champagne dreams and caviar wishes on the government's dime. This woman stopping by to look for toasters and ask questions about where she got the money for extra food just seems so petty. It seems some nosy busybody has been paying attention to who's coming and going from Claudine's apartment and took notice of Rufus coming by to visit, which results in the social workers stopping by more frequently. It's not exactly clear how much time has gone by, but they've probably been dating for a few months by this point. While forming his relationship with Claudine, Roop also makes an effort to bond with her kids. Claudine is doing the best she can, but the kids need a bit more individualized attention. Roop interacts with them one-on-one, and most, excluding maybe the youngest daughter, are dealing with an identity crisis or some degree of hopelessness. The middle son, Paul, appears rather young, not even like high school age, but more like a preteen. Yet he's already shoplifting and cutting school to hang out on the streets where he plays craps with grown men from around the neighborhood. Roop gets involved and realizes that the kid is quite intelligent, though very concerned with hustling and getting money. He's heading down the wrong path, and things would only get worse without any intervention. Paul's preoccupation with getting money likely comes from seeing his mom struggling. Roop encourages Paul to forget about the street and instead go to school and focus on getting a proper education. As the story progresses, Claudine, Roop, and most of the kids are starting to settle into a regular routine and are comfortable around each other, but the flow of the film is broken up by these random impromptu visits by Miss Cabot. Each time she pops up, Claudine and the kids have to scramble to put stuff away, which now includes some items that Roop has contributed to the household. The welfare rules give Miss Cabot the right to nickel and dime the cost of anything above the basics that might be in the house and deduct those funds from the money Claudine receives. When Miss Cabot finds Roop in the apartment, she begins asking Claudine all kinds of questions and him as well. Her concern is less about the welfare and well-being of the children and more about how to reduce the money provided to the family or, if possible, get them completely off welfare. With Roop now being in the picture, Miss Cabot begins to push for him to shoulder more of the household's financial responsibilities. She has no idea how long these two have been together or the stability of their relationship. Given that she immediately pushed for Roop to begin providing for the family, I would assume that similar efforts had already been made to do the same with the children's fathers, but proved unsuccessful. Determined to continue seeing Claudine, but not wanting to deal with the drama from the welfare office, Roop decides that he's going to take on more financial responsibility for the kids. In time, that would be a reasonable expectation, especially if Roop marries Claudine or otherwise ends up moving into the home. But it seems like a bad idea to push a woman to immediately become financially dependent on a man that she's only just begun dating. The kids actually need more than they're getting, and Claudine is doing what she can, but is stretched a bit thin. The youngest son, Francis, wants to be invisible, and then at a point stops speaking. Meanwhile, the oldest daughter, Claudine, Charlene, is desperate for attention and is allowing herself to be led astray by some boy she's dating. Just about every word out of her mouth is about this boy and what he thinks are said. Charles, the oldest boy, is also struggling. He displays a bit of bravado, but there's a sense of hopelessness there as well. As the younger kids begin to warm up to Roop, Charlene and Charles remain distant as though waiting for the other shoe to drop. With things going well and Roop now being a positive and mostly welcome presence in their life, Claudine and the younger kids decide to have a Father's Day party for Roop. And as often happens in life, right when things are going great, something occurs to throw you off track. Roop is caught off guard by a substantial increase in his child support payments and his paycheck being garnished to the point that he will likely have financial difficulties. It's a movie, so you have to suspend reality to a degree, but one can't help but wonder if Miss Cabot might not have passed along her finding that Roop was now seeing Claudine. How that works, I can't say, but I can't otherwise figure out how that increase occurs at this particular moment. That's not to say that Roop shouldn't be provided for his kids, as they are his responsibility, but if he hasn't gotten a raise or some other increase in earnings, what would be the reason for his child support increasing? I assumed that Roop was planning to marry Claudine, and with them living together, the money that he had been paying for his apartment would go towards their shared household. We don't get much background on the details of Claudine's and Roop's past relationships. While we know that Roop has 2 kids who live in another state, it's unclear if he sees them infrequently just because of the distance or because of some issue with their mom. Because he's a man who's working and living on his own without any dependents, he doesn't have many, if any, options for seeking out financial assistance. The government offers assistance for children, the elderly, and individuals with disabilities or medical needs, but in most cases, not able-bodied men. And so, after attempting to offer Claudine assistance, he now finds himself in financial problems, which throws him into a downward spiral. Before, he was a jolly, happy-go-lucky guy with morals and principles, and now, in the midst of his frustration, he breaks down and goes from anger to incredible sadness. Buckling under the pressure and not wanting to face the kids or Claudine, he instead chooses to not show up to the party. He legitimately had things going on in his life, but should have had the decency to call and tell them he wasn't coming. Not showing up disappoints the kids, as he'd won most of them over, and it seemed like even Charles might have been starting to come around. Never mind Claudine, she has feelings and would be hurt, but she is an adult. To enter these kids' lives and make them promises of being there only to leave the picture the moment things get difficult is not cool. Whether Roop just needed to step away for a moment and figure things out, or wanted to step away forever, he owed it to the kids to tell them. To do otherwise was just cowardly. It's a movie, but if he ever came around again, I'd be concerned that he would just pick up and leave again the next time he faced some difficulty. You shouldn't feel the need to choose between being the hero or nothing at all. It's perfectly acceptable to be human and vulnerable at some point between those 2 extremes. Neither Claudine or the kids are interested in him for his money, so there's no reason to feel as though he should no longer come around. Charles is involved with the community activism organization that's at least focused in part on getting people jobs that pay a livable wage. The girls and Claudine miss Roop, but it's telling that all 3 of the boys make an effort to seek him out and bring him back. He's not perfect, but the kids recognize that they need him not just as a positive male role model, but also to have some degree of hope for their futures. They have a rather negative outlook on life, and he's begun the process of turning that around. Losing hope, Charles decides to cut his losses and get a vasectomy so as not to be like the other men with whom he's come into contact. From the outset and reliably throughout the movie, Charles held out that Roop was going to eventually let everyone down. During a conversation with Claudine after his vasectomy, he expresses his frustration at having seen this situation play out between Claudine and men on multiple occasions. He's seen these men come along and say all the right things, but eventually they all abandon her, sometimes leaving behind a new mouth to feed. From the outset, another pregnancy and even less resources to go around has been a concern for the kids, but Roop calmed their fears and promised to be different. In a sense, he was, because he seemed so genuine, which made the heartbreak of his sudden absence even more hurtful. Charles recognizes that Claudine is hurt, but doesn't think she deserves any sympathy, as he'd warned her against getting her hopes up once again. Claudine is hurt for herself, but also for the kids because she can see how much of an impact the collapse of this relationship is having on them. Charles rubs salt in her wounds by pretty much saying, "I told you so." He has so much going on, but because of the number of children, Claudine isn't able to consistently give them the amount of individual attention that they really need. Charles is struggling inside, and his feelings of desperation push him to take steps to ensure he doesn't have children who will suffer in the world. Claudine recognizes and laments that Charles has grown so tired of the world beating down on him and attempting to emasculate him that he's taken steps to destroy perceived aspects of his own manhood before the world gets a chance. For lack of a better term, this is a nasty conversation to take place between a mother and son because the things he says to her, while true to a degree, are intended to be hurtful. As the parting coup de grace, Charles suggests that Claudine spend less time moping about Roop and take a closer look at Charlene as she's heading down the same path. This time, the potential additional mouth to feed isn't being carried by Claudine, but rather Charlene. Charlene's lack of self-identity and desire to be down led to her following behind this boy like some naive, lovesick puppy, which has now resulted in a pregnancy. Previously, Claudine had caught Charlene sneaking in the house after breaking curfew to go, drinking with this boy. How old is this guy if he's able to buy liquor in a bar? Or maybe it was like the times. I don't know if they had age limits back then. Charlene then spent the night tasting that liquor the second time around, and while Claudine issued a warning trying to talk sense into the girl, she comforted her and also gathered the girls into her bed where she cuddled with them. Claudine tried to warn her then by letting Charlene know that while she's her mom and now older, though only 30-something, she has lived and knows the kind of game a young man might be trying to run. Don't fall for the okie doke because Claudine has been there. Having kids at such an age where you're unprepared and so is the father is a recipe for making your life difficult. Now faced with the reality of Charlene being pregnant, Claudine is angry and disappointed because she's lived her life and wanted something different for Charlene. I understood Claudine's reaction, but it was still wrong. It didn't help the situation and was likely part of why Charlene didn't tell her that she thought she might be pregnant. Things were going so well, but when they started to fall apart, it was like a domino effect. Claudine was dealing with the lady from the welfare office, then Roop. The kids as a group, as well as their individual needs and drama combined with just the day-to-day of their survival. It's just a lot going on. Now your teen daughter is about to have a baby, and your eldest son has taken steps in hopes to never have children. It's a lot. During an earlier conversation, Charles asked Claudine why she even gave birth to him. He felt that she should have just killed him before he was born. If the only option was being born into this struggle and hardship, he would have preferred to have not been born. Throughout the movie, Claudine acknowledges the difficulty of raising these kids on her own, but also stresses the point that they're her kids and she loves them. Regardless of how they came to be or whatever the situation, she doesn't regret having any of them. She just wishes her living circumstances were different. So Charles asking her that question caught her off guard because it was not in line with how she views herself or her children. It's perfectly valid for people to decide to wait and try to have kids later in life or not at all. But Charles making what at the time was likely a permanent decision at such a young age wasn't a good idea. I would also question what doctor would perform such a procedure without his parents' knowledge or consent, as he's seemingly underage. He's like the flip side of Charlene, but they've made these very important decisions at such a young age without fully considering what it will mean for their futures. Claudine is actually a really great movie that I picked up on DVD several years ago and have watched several times since then. I knew nothing about the movie and mostly checked it out because I like the fanciness of Diahann Carroll and love the Gladys Knight version of The Makings of You. Curtis Mayfield created the movie's soundtrack and might have also done its score. I'm less certain on that point, both of which are incredible. I like female celebrities and TV/movie characters that are very well put together. And I mostly knew Diahann Carroll from reruns as Whitley's mom in A Different World. And that seemed to be primarily the types of roles she portrayed, or at least what I've seen from her. The role of Claudine, a welfare mom from Harlem, was quite a departure for her, as she'd played the notable role of Julia in the 1960s, which was rather pivotal. There was initially concern that Carroll might not be able to pull off the role, as she was known as a well-dressed, well-tailored woman who was always decked out in designer clothes. Yet she landed the role and played an important part in what turned out to be a pretty interesting movie. There were several comedic moments as well as some campy over-the-top drama, but it all came together to make a pretty good movie. The film is entertaining, but manages to touch on some astute points about the reality of poor people, poor Black women in particular, being on welfare. It also gives a glimpse into the other side of that perspective. Not excusing men who selfishly abandon their children, but rather those who are trying to do the best that they can with regards to providing for their kids, but having some difficulty in that regard. It's a movie that I've enjoyed watching time and time again. The reason I picked it for Women's History Month is because Diahann Carroll stars in the movie, and she's made fairly significant contributions in the history of Black entertainment, and also because the subject matter touches on intersectionality and poverty. I don't support the glamorization or normalization of struggling, but at the same time, we shouldn't shy away from telling the stories of people whose lives aren't perfect, as they also need representation. Thanks for tuning in. Show notes are available on the Noir Histoire website via the link in the episode description. If you enjoyed this episode and want more movie recommendations, subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell, and check out my movie review playlist.